Today's webinar is Drupal Step by Step, How We Build Our Training Site, Part 1, with Dave Myberg, who's a Senior Engineer here at Acqvia. We're excited to have Dave on the call. Heather James will also be on the call, who's the Manager of Learning Services here at Acqvia.
Alrighty. So today I'm just going to go through kind of some of the site architecture and construction of how we moved our old training.acqvia.com site from Drupal 6 to Drupal 7. A little bit about me. I'm a senior engineer at Acqvia. I've been here about 2.5 years now, and I'm sort of the lead engineer on Acqvia.com. And I also have a bunch of other small sites that I look after, including now training.acqvia.com. So the things we're going to cover today, a little bit about the site architecture, some of the modules that we used in building the new site, how we put together some of our content types. We'll talk a little bit about the data migration from Drupal 6 to Drupal 7. I'll show you some interesting views where we throw in a couple of arguments and contextual filters. And then in the last two little bits, we're going to talk about how performance got improved a little bit and how we made maintenance easier for all of us involved in the site. So who will benefit from this talk? Developers and site builders mostly. If you have some experience in Drupal, that'll definitely help you out a little bit. But if you're new to Drupal as well, you'll definitely pick up a couple of interesting and useful tips. All right, so just a preview of kind of where we were and what we ended up with. So on the left is our old training site, kind of 90s style looking, and I think we did a fairly good job upgrading it to a more modern look. Definitely a lot easier to use now as well. All right, so some of the requirements for this project, we wanted to keep the basic site architecture the same. Landing pages, content types, more or less the same. We did drop some content and we did add one or two new things, but for the most part, the main architecture is more or less the same. What we managed to improve, or what we wanted to improve, was a better editing experience for us as admins as well as for the partners who are actually creating the events on the site for us. We wanted to better handle the event status because sometimes we had issues where an event got canceled and it was kind of a complicated process of how to manage canceled events. Publishing workflow, we wanted to help make that a little bit better, and finally the user management for the partners, how to deal with a bunch of stuff on the site for them, make their life a lot easier. All right, so some of the building blocks. Right, jumped straight into a demo. I will show you a little bit of what the site looks like right now. So here's our front page. I'm just using a local copy of the site just so that we don't have, hopefully, any issues, technical difficulties. And it's mainly a site focused on events. So we're going to look at the upcoming events. We have a nice map, and we show at the top, we show our online events, and then we show our various in-person events. So I'm going to just pick one of these guys. So this one, Drupal module development. This is the event page. We have all the various important information on the right side. We show some information about the course that the event is going to be doing. We click through on to the course that's related to this event. It'll tell you all the details, the level, the track that the course is in. So several courses can form part of a certain track. You'll see the upcoming events for a particular course. I'll click you through to the track. So this is the immersion for developers, and these are the courses that you can find for this particular track. So we have three content types here that we're looking at now. We're having an event node, which has a node reference to a course, which itself has a node reference to track. All right, so that's an overview of the most important parts of the site. All right, so next. So our main site architecture, events, courses, and tracks, and we had a couple of static landing pages for general information. I think resources, private training, that kind of thing. All right, so let's look a bit more in depth at some of the content types that we have. Event nodes. The event nodes have the location, the date, the cost. That's the actual thing that you're going to be attending to learn about a particular subject. The course nodes, which are a node reference from the event, have the learning objectives, the prerequisites, that kind of information. And finally, the track nodes are simply a grouping of courses, kind of like a category, but we're using node reference to link all of those together. All right. So, event nodes. These are created by our partners. They have, like I mentioned already, a node reference to a course node, and with that, via that node reference, we actually display the course information, or a brief part of that information at the top of each event node, as you saw. The address for the actual event is handled with the location module, and in fact, our Drupal 6 site and our Drupal 7 site both use location modules, so that actually made our migration, which I'll talk about later, a little bit easier. Events can be in person, where you go to a place to actually physically attend it, or they can be online. And that designation will affect the display of the map. If it's online, obviously, there's no physical location, so there's no need for a map. Then we have event status options. So when the partner is actually creating the node, they can set the status of the event. So we have a draft event, which is not visible to anybody. We have canceled events, which are as well not visible. And then we have tentative events, which are events that are probably going to happen. And finally, we have confirmed events. I don't know if you'll be able to see this too well, but I'll show you a bit more in depth later. Some of the content type changes are quite nice, especially moving with Drupal 7. We have vertical tabs, which make organization of the various fields a lot nicer visually. It's easier to follow the track of the node form, where things are. Just makes it easier for everybody to handle. All right. So a little bit more detail on the event status thing, because this is one of the more important features that we added to the new site to help everybody. So as you can see, the field is a list field using radio buttons. So you can only select one thing at a time, obviously. And depending on which option you select, different things will happen to the node, and you'll see a different badge or button displayed on the actual node itself. As I mentioned, draft and canceled events are unpublished, so people don't get to see them. The point if it's not happening. Tentative has the orange button, confirmed is green. And we actually use pre-process field function to style the buttons, adding a class for the icons and the pop-up text. When you hover over some of them, you'll see some interesting text. Particularly the tentative event, we link to another page which explains what a tentative event is. All right, so those buttons then get displayed on each event node right next to the event details. Okay, so let's have a look at the node form, and I'll show you how the event node has been put together. So I'm just going to use this same event that we looked at a little bit earlier. If we edit it, you'll see we got the title, usual kind of thing. We have our node reference linked to the course nodes, so we just simply list the various course nodes and choose the one that the event is going to be on. Our event status is positioned just to the top right. It's pretty important, so we did some special formatting just to have it nicely positioned. The regular body, just so in case you're wondering, I'm using BU editor as the default editor. I don't personally like WYSIWYG editors. They do weird things. And hopefully in Drupal 8 that'll all be much nicer. So a couple other things, text formatting help. Just got that out of the way. Here's our sign-up link. So Each partner will have their own place where you actually go do the sign-ups. We've grouped some of the details together in a vertical tab, so date, cost, delivery, in-person, online, and the language. Location is the location module. You enter in your various address details, you get a nice little map. It automatically geocodes the latitude and longitude, which we'll then use later on the main events page. So all the event nodes get shown here. And what else? And then provided is just a bunch of things that will get provided at the event. Okay, so that's what the node form looks like. So this is what the partners and administrators are going to see. So let's have a look at how this was put together. So content types, event, manage fields. So using field group module, it allows us to group stuff really nicely, status for the event status section. And we've added a couple of extra little things. We can add different types of fields, not just regular field sets, or in the case of details, a vertical tab. This one is using HTML5 aside field type. It's just a way to differentiate. It's basically like a fancy div. And that allows us then to target the status field group and stick it off to the right. The rest of the stuff is just main body, group things together nicely, and you can add classes and stuff to add, do whatever special styling and kind of things you need. So on the display side, so manage fields, this is what the form is going to look like when people edit the node. Display is obviously what gets shown on the front end. So we have event details. We have basically status, body, and location. That's the only thing that gets shown through the node display settings. But if you remember, we have all the actual event details on the right-hand side, and that's done with the view, and I'll show you that a little bit later as well. Okay, so that's just a basic idea of how we put together some of these, at least the event node type. You can see here we use the module field formatter class, so that we can actually add specific classes to the fields for output. Sometimes the default classes that Drupal adds are not what we want, or they're too generic. So it's always nice just to throw in your own classes. It allows you to do fancy things like, have generic classes like adding a margin to the left and to the bottom if you want, rather than having to style and add a specific CSS thing in your custom style sheet. You can just add in existing classes. All right. So let's carry on here. So some of the modules we used for that field formatter class, like I mentioned, it's the custom class on a field for display. Gmap actually outputs the map on the nodes themselves. It uses the location information. And then obviously location is for adding the address, and it does the actual geocoding on the back end for us. All right. So data migration. We initially, when we said, okay, we're upgrading from Drupal 6 to Drupal 7, the initial thought is usually, okay, you just run a regular update. But with any site that has more than like one or two content types, usually you're going to run into some kind of weird problems, and you end up spending a lot of time trying to fix stuff. My preference, and I don't think I've actually ever done a regular Drupal 6 to Drupal 7 update, is to actually migrate data. There's a couple of advantages to this. The one is that you can exclude data that you don't actually want anymore. You can also finesse the data or tweak it a little bit if you need to change some stuff. Sometimes, an old site might have the date in a weird format, and you want to use a Unix timestamp in the new site. So during migration, you can actually do things like that. You can actually change the way the data is. So to migrate the data, in this example, in this site, I used the migrate module. Now, another module that I used that works with migrate is called migrate D2D. And this is a Drupal to Drupal migration module. It's built specifically to migrate Drupal 5, Drupal 6 to Drupal 7. And in fact, this is more or less, I think, what's pretty much going into Drupal 8's core setup, which is kind of nice. The nice thing with the D2D module is it gives you a user interface. But the one caveat at the moment is that you need to use these two specific versions of the module, the RC1 of Migrate and the 2.1 Beta 1 of Migrate D2D. Without those two versions, you don't get the user interface. So just be aware of that. So the way we did the migration is we initially first migrated our users across. What that does is it allows the old user IDs to be mapped to new user IDs, so that then when we import our content, say Joe Schmo created a page or a course or an event or something, his new user ID, which is probably going to be different in the new site, will then get correctly assigned to the node, so you don't lose your authors for the various bits of content. The other thing you've got to watch out for when you're migrating content is that you migrate content in the right order. So users usually come first. If you have files to migrate, you want to migrate those pretty much next. And in our situation, we have tracks, courses, and event nodes, which are all node referencing each other. So we want tracks first because courses need them. And then we want courses before events because events need a node reference the courses. So you've got to migrate that content in the right order. And during each migration of each type of content, a map is created by the migrate module. And the map says, okay, this is the old node ID, this is the new node ID. When I'm migrating the event nodes and linking to course, which had an old node ID of, say, 25, the new node ID is like 300 or whatever, it'll map correctly and you'll get data linking to the right stuff. So the only custom work that I had to do in this migration was for event nodes, which is one of the major benefits of Migrate D2D. So that's the link for the module. It gives you a very nice user interface where you can click what your source and what your destination fields are going to be. You can manually set some fields, and basically you have to write a whole lot less custom code. I don't know if you can see this too clearly, but basically on the left-hand side, you're going to get your destination field. So this is all running on the Drupal 7 site. You already have your content types created with the fields that you want. So they're all listed on the left-hand side. The source field, which is the next column, you get a drop-down for all the fields from the content type that you're importing from, and you can map them to whatever fields need to be. You can set a default value, which is the third column there. And then the last column is called the source migration. So once you've migrated in things like your users, you get what they call a source migration. And that source migration is the mapping of the old user ID to the new user ID. And if we were importing event nodes here, you would have a source migration for your course node reference field, so that it would then map the correct course node IDs to the new nodes. All right, so the custom module that we did for the events, I had to do that. There was no avoiding it because Migrate doesn't know how to handle the location field at all. I think it was called CCK location in Drupal 6, and it doesn't have any migrate. It doesn't have any settings for that, so I have to do it manually. And the location's obviously on the event node, and we also didn't want to import all the very old events. We just wanted basically the most recent and anything obviously that's going to be still coming up. All right. Let's have a quick look at the code that I did. I mean, this is very, very simple. If you didn't use Migrate D2D, you would then have to create the same custom module, but you would then physically have to write in here all your mappings for each field, what the source field is, what the destination field is, all that kind of stuff. You'd have to basically write a whole lot of code to do that. In this case, the most important thing that I needed to do was make each location field, so address, address, address to, city, state, country, that kind of thing, available as options in the Migrate D2D UI. And then I could just simply map it to the new fields. So what we do is in your migration class, you create a new migration class, and you basically pull in the main query, the database query that Migrate is going to be doing, and you join in the tables that the old location module in Drupal 6 used. And at the last line there with fields, basically you say which fields you want to map. So if for whatever reason you didn't want to map the latitude and longitude field, you could just exclude them. You don't have to. You just don't list them there, and then they don't show up in the UI. I pretty much just took every single column, and if I didn't want to use it, I simply don't map it in the UI. Just leave it blank. So that by doing this, I would then have all the location bits of data as separate fields that I could then map to the new location fields in Drupal 7. The other thing we wanted to do was exclude the old event content. So in the function prepare row, you do this kind of stuff. This allows you to modify your incoming data if you wanted to. Like I mentioned before, if your date was in the weird format and you wanted to change it to a different format, you could do it here. The other thing you do is you return false for something, and that basically makes sure it does not get imported. So what I did was I checked the event date, which is using value 2, which would be the end time of an event, making sure that that has passed. I checked what the current time is right now, or at the time that I was doing this migration, and if now is greater than the event date, in other words, has the event passed, I return false, which means just ignore it. Don't bother with this row, leave it alone. And then afterwards, you just need to return true, and so if now is less than event date, i.e. the event is in the future, it's going to return true, and it will continue with doing whatever it needs to do to migrate the data in. So that's literally all that I needed to do and write custom code for the migration anyway. So a lot easier than having to write, hundreds of lines of code to do mappings and all sorts of other things. All right, so onto some interesting views. So most of the content is normally accessible. We don't really need to do anything fancy, except for we wanted to have content displayed in a nice way in certain cases, like the events, having all the details on the right-hand side in a little block. Simplest way to do a lot of our stuff is using views. Views is great because it has, all its own caching. You can do pretty much anything you want with it, and it's the most used module, so pretty much everything works most of the time pretty well. We use views in various places to show things like upcoming events, the courses in this track, as you can see here. These are all views using contextual filters and in some cases relationships to actually pull in the data from other nodes that are linking to your current page, or actually in the case of the event sidebar, showing content from the event node itself in a block. So we do it on events node, course nodes, and tracks, and I have a couple of administration views for some advanced content management, where I can actually search for I can search titles, that kind of stuff. The default Drupal content admin is lacking a little bit for some cases. All right, so like I said, event details. This is actually a block created by views, and the view actually just pulls in the fields from the node that it's actually on at the moment and throws them into a block. So let's have a look at how that view is built. All right. So this is the event details block. Basically, we're just creating an unformatted list. We have the fields that we want to show in that block: sign up, course, date, cost, all that kind of stuff. Obviously, I always by default have the published, and its content type is for events. Now, how does views know what node it's on and what fields to actually use. If you just did it like this, and you can see it shows display all items, you'd just basically get the fields for every single event node on the site, which would probably not be what you want. So we use a thing called contextual filters. Now, we use the node ID of as a contextual filter. So let me show you how that's configured. So by default, it says display all results from the specified field when the filter value is not available. But what we do is we select provide a default value, and the default value, I mean, you could specify a fixed value, but we use the content ID from the URL. Now, if you look at an event node on our site, it's the URL is event/something and the name, the title. So it's using clean URLs. But in reality, the actual node URL is still always going to be node/a number. In fact, the node ID. So Views knows this, and it can always find that ID. So it pulls in the ID, it loads it up, and it looks for these fields, and then generates it. Generates a block for us. So this is the node ID of that same node we saw a little bit earlier, that event node. If you don't have anything here, by default the query shows you nothing because there's no node ID. But we put in the node ID, 381, I think it was. 381. There we go. Update the preview, and you see all the fields. And this is just the fields in their pretty much their raw state. We'll do some pre-processing on the view fields to make them look all pretty. You can see provided for you is just straight text, in person, that kind of stuff. But when you actually look at the display here, it looks a lot nicer. All right. So basically, what we're looking at is a simple contextual filter where we're pulling the node ID from the current URL of the node. So it knows, pull the information from this node, not any other node. All right. So the next one, load that up again. So now if we look at our course nodes, on our course node we show a block of upcoming events. So now these are events that have a node reference to the node you're actually looking at. So I call this a reverse node reference, or a view using a reverse node reference. So let's show how this is built. It's a little bit more complicated. So here's the view. We want to show in that table, we're creating a table obviously. We want to show the title, date, city, province, various information, and we throw in a link to actually go to the event node itself. We have some filters. We have the exposed date filter and country as well as an exposed filter. The magic happens in contextual filters again, using a node ID, as well as, in this case, we need to use a relationship. Because right now, if you use just straight node ID, and you'll see it's going to be using the same setup where it uses content ID from URL. If you do that, you're looking at the course node, because that's the node you're on at the moment, but you want the event nodes that actually reference this course node. So we need to use a thing called a relationship. And relationships, basically the only relationships that you can use are node reference fields. So we're using the relationship for field course, which is the field name that we use in the event node. So we simply just add it in, and then we make sure that our contextual filter for content node ID is actually using this relationship. By default, it does not use a relationship, but like I said, then it'll only be looking at the course node you're on and obviously won't find event fields. So we use the relationship. It can then go through the reverse node reference and find event nodes that are referencing the node you're on, and then show the relevant data. And don't worry if this stuff sounds a bit confusing, because it is. I struggle to remember how to set up these things, so I basically, once I've done it, I write down the instructions on what to do. So like, okay, use relationships, use the relationship on the contextual filter for the node ID, that kind of stuff. And then, if I don't use it for a couple of weeks or a couple of months, I always forget, and I just go back to my list of useful tips and find out how to do it. So these are somewhat complicated things and not very intuitive. All right. So that's probably one of the more complicated kind of setups that we have for views. And we do this kind of view in various places. You can see it on the track nodes, which lists the courses. That it uses the same setup. All right. Okay. So a little bit on improving performance. The biggest performance gain that we really got was just using Drupal 7 over Drupal 6. It has better caching overall. Core and contrib modules were used as much as possible. We had very little custom code. We only used custom code when it was absolutely needed. We tried as much as possible to do everything with views, like you saw. I mean, you could write custom code to generate the blocks yourself, but why do that when you have views? It does it all very well and it has great caching. We actually only have 8 blocks on the entire site, and 7 of them are actually created by views. We have one custom block that creates the login link and a little user profile drop down when you're actually logged in. And then performance-wise, for myself as the admin, as the developer on the site, we were initially on SVN, which is horribly slow. So we managed to switch over to Git with the new site, and it just makes my life a lot easier. All right. So maintenance. This is one of the things where, us as the admins were struggling a bit with handling a lot of the data and the content and, dealing with certain events not happening or cancellations, as I mentioned. So we created the event status setup, which, depending on what radio button is checked, the event node will then automatically be published or unpublished. And we do that using the rules module. So it'll then check the value of that field and do stuff accordingly whenever the node is saved. We gave our partners a lot more power to manage their own events. The screenshot on the right is what a partner would see when they logged in. So they can see all their events. They can filter automatically by confirmed, unconfirmed, which is tentative, and canceled events. Partners are the only ones who can see canceled events because they're unpublished. And we gave them bulk operations on each of these lists, so they could then select a whole bunch of events and say, okay, all of these canceled, or all of these are confirmed, off we go. And we gave them also the option to override some of the stuff with publish and unpublish. On the admin side, we used a theme called Shiny. Gives you nice big buttons, the text is a little bit bigger, it handles a lot of contrib modules like views, it has theming already for that. Just to make our life a bit simpler, we could use 7, which is built in Drupal 1, but there's a few things I didn't like about it too much. So Shiny just looked a lot nicer and fitted more with the front-end view. And the front-end theme is Bootstrap, or Twitter Bootstrap. So it looks a little bit like it. We can't actually use Twitter Bootstrap as the backend because Views does not work with it. Twitter Bootstrap requires jQuery 1.7, and the Views UI tends to break kind of horribly when you do that with jQuery. So we run jQuery update for the front end, but not for the back end. All right. So custom site module. Pretty much every site I've ever built, there's at least something that you want to write custom. You want to modify a couple of things, maybe tweaks to the user interface. On the admin side, override some theme functions, field processing, that kind of stuff. You can also do some of those things in the theme layer as well. But sometimes you also just want to do it in the module, so it's always in effect regardless of the theme. So in our custom site module, we have things like collapsing the text format information. Below text areas, you have, usually on a Drupal site, you're going to have a bunch of information about the text format using filtered or filtered HTML, full HTML, those kind of things. Most of the time, people don't really need to see that stuff, and it just takes up space. So I basically did essentially like a form alter. and wrap that whole little thing in a collapsed field set. So just using regular Drupal collapsible field sets, so it does it all by itself. I don't have to write any JS or anything for that. I also added a documentation link to the just below that information, so below text area. That allows people who are editing the nodes, if they want to add in some classes to get some kind of effect, maybe make a button or a panel or something like that, they get a link straight to Bootstrap information. They can see what classes they need to use, how they need to set up HTML if they want to do that. So that link was added in as well, just to make life easier for everybody. And then the custom site module is also going to include some custom actions, which what you saw with the partner admin here, cancel, confirm, unconfirm events. Those kind of actions we created, and they're all in the module. And lastly, use the module for the exportables, so views, rules, whatever else you want to export. All right, so that's pretty much it. If there's any questions, feel free to ask them now. I'm just going to, the next slide I'm just going to show you is some of the modules we used that I may not have mentioned earlier. So one was draggable views. That allows our admin side people to reorder stuff in tables on our course listing views. We want to be able to reorder the courses kind of randomly, so it's easier with draggable views. You just look at the page and you drag it around. The Google Analytics EP module allows you to add custom Google Analytics events on things. So you just write a little bit of code, and it's a very simple API. You write some code, and basically you can say, okay, on this, track every button click for this button or for that link, and it'll do it, and it'll automatically feed into your Google Analytics account, and you'll be able to see events there of how many times people have clicked on various things. The other one, menu position, is for breadcrumbs. So you can say, okay, all event nodes should fall under the upcoming events menu item. So then they get the right breadcrumbs. Just simple things like that. And that's pretty much the main part of the main modules we used for the site. And views bulk operations, obviously. And that's pretty much it. Custom modules, the migration module, and the toolkit module, and that's it. So, any questions?
Yeah, I have a question, Dave.
Sure, go for it.
Yeah, I don't know if I've ever asked you. I'm curious, why did you use views? When we're talking about the event display and the detailed information from the event, you put it over into a visual sidebar, but it's obviously all the same node. Why did you use that instead of Display Suite in this case?
Yeah, good question. I have used Display Suite on other sites, and I do like it. But we're only really doing something fancy on event nodes, so I didn't really see the need for slapping in the whole massive thing that is Display Suites to do something fairly simple. If we had more content types and we needed to do more fancy stuff, yeah, we could definitely, switch to Display Suite to do that. But literally, this is the only content type where we're doing something like this. And I did add some little JS just to make this thing sticky. That was the other reason I wanted it in a sidebar, so that when people are scrolling down, they don't lose the sign-up link as well.
Right. Ah, very good. And, well, another thing I wanted to know then about this issue, this choice of using views is, obviously someone might hear this and think, oh, boy, there's like a views query every time an event is loaded. But you've obviously done some caching because it's a very speedy site.
Yep.
Could you show us how, the caching configuration on that view?
Literally, you don't have to do anything. You just run it, you set up your view, and it's automatically cached for you. The other thing is we use Varnish as a front-end cache, so that also helps. I literally have not selected any specific caching. The default views caching works fine for this kind of stuff.
Oh, right.
Yep.
Oh, very good. Cool.
So, it's pretty straightforward. There's no craziness that you have to do with using views. It's built-in caching is pretty much sufficient for everything.
Cool. And I was going to ask questions just to, about like the use of Twitter Bootstrap in views, and then I realized, oh, we're actually going to talk about that next week. I'm really excited about that. It's made my life so much easier as well.
Right. Yeah. So next week, as Heather mentioned, we're going to be talking about the front end side of this site. So how we use Twitter Bootstrap, how views and Twitter Bootstrap can work together quite nicely. Grid system, responsive layout, all that kind of stuff. So, I mean, one of the cool things with this site, in fact, I didn't mention it earlier, is that the whole thing is pretty responsive, and it works really nicely on a mobile phone as well. So it all works out of the box with Twitter Bootstrap. You don't have to do anything. You have to tweak a few things here and there, obviously, but for the most part, it just works straight out of the box, which is great. Saves me a whole pain and stuff.
And it all comes free with. There's so much stuff that comes free with Twitter Bootstrap. It's kind of shocking.
Yeah. I mean, all these buttons are just Bootstrap classes. This little pop-up that you see in the black, that's just a Bootstrap thing. So there's a lot less coding and customization that you have to do with Bootstrap.
That's brilliant. Oh gosh. I'm just actually amazed. I wonder, Hannah, are there any other questions from the audience?
The first question that came in switching from SVN to Git, did you just start with a new Git repository, or is there a tool to bring over all the history that is in SVN?
I know we started with a new repo. It's just easier. I believe there is a way to bring the SVN history across, but because the site was in Drupal 6, we didn't really bother. We didn't have a huge amount of history anyway. So I literally exported. Well, I got the SVN checkout and then just made that into a Git repo, deleting the SVN folder. It was pretty simple. And then did the Drupal 7 straight on top of that to overwrite the whole thing.
Great. If anybody has any additional questions, can you please ask them now? Okay, I think that's it for questions. Heather and Dave, do you want to end with anything?
Well, I just wanted to say I'm so glad that you could come and do this presentation, Dave, and it's just really, the whole site's just so simple and really elegant, and it's kind of funny when you're showing some of these tricks, it's like, oh, it means I didn't have to do a lot of work, and I love your version of lazy, and doing things an easy way. Because it's
I figure if I do things simple like that, it's actually going to save me a lot of time, and you guys don't have to come back and say, oh, wait, we need this fixed and we need to do this. It's pretty much it's all done automatically. So
that's very excellent.
Cool. The joys of views.
I'm looking forward to next week, too.
Yep, thanks everyone.
Thank you everyone for attending, and thank you Dave and Heather. Dave especially for the wonderful presentation. We can't wait till next week. Slides and recording of the webinar will be posted on the website in the next 24 hours, and we'll also email you out a copy. Thanks so much, everyone.
Thanks. Bye.
Okay, bye.